Hey, tonight we are going to explore the ancient streets of Rome, where marble columns reach toward azure skies, and the echoes of a civilization that shaped our world still whisper through time. The year is 120 CE, during Emperor Hadrian's peaceful reign, a golden era of Roman culture, architecture, and daily life. Picture yourself wrapped not in your modern clothes but in a woolen toga, your feet in leather sandals, as you prepare to navigate a world without smartphones, air conditioning, or modern medicine. The sensibilities, customs, and rhythms of this ancient metropolis would feel utterly foreign to you. From the morning ritual of bread distribution to the evening call of oil lamps being lit across the 7 hills. This journey through Roman daily life might seem familiar in glimpses, then suddenly, startlingly alien in ways you've never imagined. If you're enjoying these historical journeys into sleep, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps these stories reach others looking for peaceful paths to slumber. I'm curious, what ancient civilization fascinates you most as you prepare for sleep tonight? Now dim your lights, rest your head on your pillow, and let the gentle sounds of your room fade away as we travel back nearly 2,000 years to a Rome both magnificent and humbling, where every sense would be engaged in ways both delightful and overwhelming. Dawn breaks over the 7 hills of Rome, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. The year is 120 CE, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, a time of relative peace and prosperity for the sprawling empire. The morning air carries a peculiar blend of scents. The yeasty aroma of freshly baked bread from the numerous pistrina, the earthy fragrance of olive oil lamps being extinguished after the night, and beneath it all, the ever-present undertone of a city where 1 million souls dwell closely together without modern sanitation. In an insula, a multi-story apartment building on the Esquiline Hill, a figure stirs beneath a woolen blanket. Lucius Valerius, a middle-class scribe, rises with the sun as most Romans do. His apartment, while modest by patrician standards, represents comfortable living for a citizen of his status. The room is sparsely furnished with a wooden bed, a small table with a clay oil lamp, and a chest containing his few belongings. The walls are adorned with simple frescoes, pastoral scenes in faded reds and blues that bring a touch of nature into this urban dwelling. Lucius moves to the window, pushing aside the wooden shutters to let in the morning light. Below, the city already hums with activity. Water carriers balance their amphorae as they make deliveries to wealthier homes. Bakers arrange their morning goods, and shopkeepers prepare for the day's commerce. Unlike the modern human accustomed to immediate access to running water, Lucius must plan his morning ablutions carefully. There is no bathroom in his insula. Indeed, the concept would seem strange to him. Instead, a terracotta pot serves as his chamber pot, which he'll empty later into the public sewers, or have collected by the stercorari, men who gather human waste to sell to farmers as fertilizer. For washing, he pours water from a pitcher into a shallow bronze basin. The water was collected yesterday from one of the public fountains, fed by Rome's magnificent aqueducts. He splashes his face and hands, then cleans his teeth in the Roman manner, rubbing them with a rough cloth dipped in salt, or sometimes a mixture containing crushed eggshells and soda. There are no toothbrushes or mint-flavored toothpaste in his world. The resulting cleanliness would fall far short of modern standards. But to Lucius, this daily ritual leaves him feeling refreshed and ready for the day. His breakfast is simple: a piece of bread dipped in watered wine, perhaps with some olives or a small portion of cheese if available. There is no coffee to jolt him awake. no refrigerated milk or morning cereal. The bread is heartier and coarser than modern varieties, dense with a thick crust, the result of baking in wood-fired ovens. The wine, even when diluted as is the Roman custom for morning consumption, has a sharper, more earthy taste than modern palates might appreciate, often with undertones of herbs or honey used to mask imperfections in its making. Dressed now in his tunic, a simple garment resembling a knee-length shirt made of undyed wool that somewhat resembles a modern t-shirt, but looser and more flowing, Lucius contemplates the day ahead. As a citizen of moderate means, he doesn't wear the toga unless attending formal functions. That cumbersome garment, essentially a large semicircular cloth nearly 6 meters in length that had to be carefully draped around the body, is reserved for official business and citizens of higher standing. His feet slide into leather sandals, worn and comfortable from use. The Roman caligae, with their distinctive pattern of cutouts and straps that provide surprisingly good support, while allowing air to circulate around the foot. Practical in Rome's warm climate. Before leaving his apartment, Lucius takes a moment at his household shrine, the lararium. This small alcove contains painted or sculpted images of the lares and penates, protective household deities, along with representations of his ancestors. He offers a brief prayer and a small pinch of incense, a daily ritual as natural to him as checking one's phone might be to a person in the 21st century. Religion is not a separate part of life for Romans, but woven into every aspect of daily existence, a constant acknowledgement of forces greater than themselves that must be respected and appeased. Stepping out into the corridor of his insula, Lucius exchanges morning greetings with neighbors. The building houses families of various trades, a weaver, a cobbler, a clerk from the grain office. Unlike modern apartment buildings with their emphasis on privacy, the insula fosters a communal atmosphere, with residents sharing news, gossip, and occasionally resources. Children dart between adults, playing games with nuts or small carved figurines. An elderly woman sits in a patch of sunlight near the entrance, her gnarled hands occupied with spindle and wool, adding to the familial atmosphere of this vertical neighborhood. As Lucius descends the narrow, worn stairs to the street level, he mentally prepares for navigation through Rome's crowded streets. Unlike modern cities with their wide avenues designed for vehicular traffic, Rome's streets form a chaotic web, narrow, winding, and packed with humanity. The main streets might be 5 to 8 meters wide, but many alleys and side passages measure barely 2 meters across, their cobblestones worn smooth by countless feet over centuries. The morning traffic ban has just lifted. During night hours, wagons and carts are prohibited in Rome's central areas to reduce noise, meaning that dawn brings a surge of delivery vehicles into the city. Handcarts piled high with goods, donkeys laden with amphorae, and ox-drawn wagons creaking under the weight of building materials all compete for space in streets that have no sidewalks, no traffic lights, and no lanes. Pedestrians must remain constantly alert, pressing themselves against buildings to allow vehicles to pass, hopping over open sewers running down the center of some streets, and navigating around the occasional pile of animal droppings or household waste tossed from upper windows. The sensory experience overwhelms in its intensity. The soundscape of Rome bears no resemblance to the mechanical hum and electronic beeps of the modern world. Instead, Lucius hears human voices in a dozen dialects from across the empire, the braying of donkeys, the creaking of cartwheels, the rhythmic hammering from metalworking shops, the calls of food vendors advertising their wares, and occasionally the sharp commands of urban cohort officers maintaining order at busy intersections. The olfactory assault is equally powerful. Without refrigeration, Food must be purchased daily, and markets fill with the aromas of fresh produce, herbs and spices brought from across the Mediterranean. These pleasant scents mingle with the less appealing odors of fish stalls, tanneries operating at the city's edge, smoke from countless cooking fires, and the inevitable smell of human sweat in a culture where daily bathing, while valued, is not always practical except for the wealthy with private baths. Lucius makes his way toward the Forum, the beating heart of Rome, where he conducts much of his business as a scribe. The route takes him past several of Rome's public fountains, where slaves and servants gather to collect water in buckets and amphorae for their households. Unlike modern cities where water comes to each residence through hidden pipes, most Romans, even those of comfortable means like Lucius, must fetch their water from these public sources or pay for delivery. The sight of these fountains, with water flowing continuously from elegantly carved spouts, serves as a visible reminder of Rome's engineering prowess, the water having travelled miles through the magnificent aqueducts from distant springs. Passing a small neighbourhood temple, Lucius notices a group gathering for morning rituals. A priest in ceremonial garments stands before the temple steps, performing a sacrifice. In this case, a relatively modest offering of grain and wine, rather than the more elaborate animal sacrifices reserved for major festivals or state occasions. The attendees, mostly local shopkeepers and residents seeking divine favor for the day's endeavors, wait respectfully as the priest intones prayers in an archaic form of Latin that even many educated Romans find difficult to understand fully. Religion in Rome is less about personal belief and more about correct practice, the precise performance of rituals thought to maintain cosmic order and secure divine goodwill. Nearing the Forum, Lucius passes one of the city's many public toilets, or latrini. Unlike the private facilities of the modern era, Roman toilets are communal affairs. Long marble benches with keyhole-shaped openings arranged around the walls of a room, often with space for 20 or more people to sit simultaneously. Water flows continuously in a channel beneath the seats, carrying waste to the sewers. There is no toilet paper. Instead, users clean themselves with a sponge attached to a stick, which is then rinsed in running water before the next person uses it. For a modern person accustomed to bathroom privacy, this arrangement would prove shocking. But for Romans, the public toilet serves as yet another social space where business can be discussed and news exchanged while attending to bodily needs. The Forum comes into view as Lucius rounds a corner, and the scale of Roman public architecture reveals itself in breathtaking fashion. The open rectangular plaza, surrounded by imposing temples, basilicas, and government buildings, covers several acres. Marble columns soar skyward, their capitals intricately carved with acanthus leaves and mythological figures. Statues of emperors, generals, and deities stand on pedestals throughout the space, painted in vibrant colors that would surprise those who envision Roman sculpture as uniformly white stone. The Temple of Saturn gleams with gilded decorations catching the morning sun, while the massive Basilica Julia hums with activity as the day's legal proceedings begin. For Lucius, this architectural grandeur forms the backdrop of his workday. He makes his way to one side of the Forum, where other scribes have set up temporary stations, small portable desks with writing implements at the ready. Here, for a fee, they serve the substantial portion of Rome's population who cannot read or write, but who nonetheless need to navigate an increasingly bureaucratic society. Today, Lucius will compose letters, draft simple legal documents, and perhaps assist merchants with their accounts or records of transactions. His writing implements bear little resemblance to modern pens and paper. For important documents, he uses papyrus imported from Egypt, an expensive material made from processed plant fibers that provides a smooth writing surface but must be handled with care. For drafts or less formal writing, he might use wooden tablets coated with wax, where text can be inscribed with a stylus and later smoothed over for reuse. His ink, made from soot, gum arabic and water, is kept in a small ceramic pot, and he writes with a reed pen that must be repeatedly dipped and occasionally recut to maintain a clean edge. As the morning progresses, Lucius assists a variety of clients. A nervous young man dictates a formal letter seeking apprenticeship with a respected carpenter. A widow needs help documenting her deceased husband's business arrangements to protect her interests. A freedman who has worked his way to prosperity wants to record the purchase of a small vineyard outside the city. For each, Lucius not only provides the technical skill of writing, but also helps navigate the formal language and conventions appropriate to different types of documents, knowledge accumulated through years of practice and observation. By midday, the forum teems with activity. The law courts are in full session in the basilicas, with advocates arguing cases before judges and curious onlookers gathering to watch particularly interesting disputes. Political announcements are made from the rostra, the elevated platform, from which officials address the public. Merchants conduct business, exchanging goods or arranging larger transactions to be completed later. Socialites stroll through in their finest clothes, seeing and being seen, while their attendants follow discreetly behind. Occasionally, a senator passes by, recognizable by the broad purple stripe on his toga and the clients who accompany him, men of lesser status who form part of his social network, offering political support in exchange for patronage. As the sun reaches its zenith, many businesses close for the midday meal and rest period, the precursor to what would later be known in Mediterranean cultures as the siesta. Unlike the modern work schedule with its short lunch break, Romans typically take several hours during the hottest part of the day for their main meal and relaxation. Lucius packs his writing implements carefully into a leather satchel and joins the crowds heading away from the forum. Rather than returning home, today Lucius decides to visit one of Rome's many public bathhouses, the Baths of Trajan, located near his route home. The massive complex, one of several imperial thermae in the city, covers several acres and serves thousands of bathers daily. For a small fee, the equivalent of perhaps a modern dollar, citizens gain access to a facility that offers far more than just bathing opportunities. Before entering the main bathing areas, Lucius stops at one of the many food stalls that have sprung up around the bath's exterior. He purchases a simple meal of bread, soft cheese and figs, eating while watching people come and go from the imposing entrance. Unlike modern swimmers heading to a pool with specialized swimwear, Romans bring minimal supplies to the baths, perhaps a small flask of scented oil, a curved metal tool called a strigil for scraping oil and dirt from the skin, and a small towel. Bathing is done nude, with men and women using separate facilities or visiting at different hours in smaller establishments. Inside, the baths follow a ritual sequence designed to cleanse both body and spirit. Lucius first enters the apoditerium, or changing room, where he removes his tunic and sandals, leaving them with an attendant. Naked now, he proceeds to the tepidarium, a warm room with heated floors and walls that helps the body adjust gradually to the higher temperatures to come. The engineering behind this heating system, called a hypercaust, involves hollow spaces beneath floors and within walls through which hot air from furnaces circulates, an ingenious form of radiant heating that wouldn't be replicated in Europe. for centuries after Rome's fall. After sufficient time in the tepidarium, where he exchanges pleasantries with acquaintances and overhears political discussions between senators unwinding from morning duties, Lucius moves to the caldarium, the hottest room, filled with steam and heated to temperatures that open the pores and induce profuse sweating. Here, slaves or attendants might be hired to apply oil to the skin, which helps loosen dirt and provides a base for later scraping with the strigil. The final stage in the bathing sequence takes Lucius to the frigidarium with its large cold water pool. The shock of immersion after the intense heat of the caldarium is invigorating, closing the pores and leaving the skin feeling tightened and refreshed. Unlike modern swimmers who might stay in a pool for extended periods, Romans typically immerse themselves briefly before emerging to dry off and dress. But the bathing ritual comprises only part of the bathhouse experience. After completing the cleansing sequence, Lucius spends time in the complex's other spaces. He visits the palaestra, an open courtyard where men exercise, wrestling or playing ball games to work up a sweat before bathing. He browses the small library, where scrolls are available for reading in comfortable chairs. He listens briefly to a poet giving a public recitation in one of the meeting halls, where cultural events regularly take place. The bathhouse functions as a community center, health club, and social networking space all in one, an essential institution of Roman urban life that would make modern fitness centers seem limited by comparison. Refreshed and relaxed after his bath, Lucius emerges into the afternoon air. The day has begun its slow decline toward evening, and he decides to make a few purchases before returning home. He makes his way to the Macellum, one of Rome's specialized food markets, where vendors sell everything from fresh vegetables to exotic spices imported from India and Arabia at tremendous expense. The market presents another sensory cornucopia, with vendors loudly advertising their wares and shoppers bargaining vigorously over prices. Unlike modern supermarkets with their fixed price tags, every transaction in a Roman market involves negotiation, with the final price determined by a complex calculus of supply, demand, the customer's perceived status, and the merchant's mood. Lucius purchases a small portion of salt fish, some lentils, a bunch of leeks, and a handful of olives, modest ingredients that he can prepare for his evening meal. For Romans of all but the poorest classes, food preparation is typically done by slaves or servants rather than the master of the household. Lucius, as a bachelor of moderate means, keeps only one slave, an elderly Greek named Dion who manages his household. The relationship between master and slave in Roman society is complex. While fundamentally exploitative by modern ethical standards, many household slaves like Dion occupy positions of trust and responsibility, managing finances, educating children, and sometimes even operating businesses on their master's behalf. Some, particularly those with specialized skills or education, might eventually purchase their freedom or be granted it in their master's will after years of service. As Lucius makes his way home through streets now golden with late afternoon light, he decides to stop at a neighborhood corpona, a combination tavern and eatery that serves as a gathering place for locals. Unlike modern restaurants with their extensive menus, the corpona offers a limited selection of dishes prepared in a small kitchen visible to patrons. Clay pots simmer with stews and porridges. A small oven produces simple flatbreads. Amphoras contain wines of varying qualities available by the cup. The clientele represents a cross-section of Rome's working people, craftsmen finishing their day's work, messengers between assignments, off-duty soldiers, and local residents seeking company and the latest news. Lucius greets the proprietor, a jovial man with arms perpetually stained to the elbow from the wines he pours, and orders a cup of posca, wine vinegar diluted with water and flavored with herbs, a common refreshment for the working class and soldiers. Taking his drink to a worn wooden table, Lucius observes the scene around him. At one table, a group plays a dice game, with small coins being exchanged after each throw. At another, two men hunched over a board scratched into the tabletop play La Trunculi, a strategy game somewhat resembling chess or checkers. In the corner, a man with a lyre plays softly, occasionally breaking into song, not for formal entertainment, but as part of the natural sociability of the space. Conversations swirl around, touching on everything from neighborhood gossip to distant military campaigns. Without newspapers, radio, or digital media, this oral exchange of information, often distorted or exaggerated in transmission, forms the primary news network of the ancient city. Today, patrons discuss Emperor Hadrian's building projects, the recent games held in the Colosseum, and persistent rumors about grain shortages in the coming winter. Unlike modern dining establishments where patrons expect tables to themselves, the Capona operates communally. When a weathered man in the rough tunic of a dock worker sits down across from Lucius without asking permission, it seems perfectly natural. They exchange brief pleasantries about the day's weather and business conditions. The conversation remains superficial. Romans maintained clear social boundaries despite physical proximity, but the brief interaction satisfies the human need for connection in the urban environment. After finishing his drink and conversation, Lucius continues homeward. The streets have grown more crowded as the workday ends for many. Oil lamps begin to appear in windows as the sun dips lower, though true darkness remains hours away in the summer evening. Without electric streetlights, navigation after dark becomes challenging even in familiar neighborhoods. Wealthy Romans might have slaves carry torches before them on evening outings, but most people simply remain home after sunset unless necessity or special celebrations call them out. Approaching his insula, Lucius encounters a religious procession making its way through the streets. Devotees of Cybele, an Eastern goddess whose cult has found followers in Rome, despite occasional official disapproval. The participants wear colorful garments and play handheld drums and cymbals, creating a hypnotic rhythm as they walk. At their center, carried on a platform, is a small statue of the goddess adorned with flowers and votive offerings. Some onlookers make respectful gestures as the procession passes. Others simply observe with curiosity or mild disapproval. Religious diversity flourishes in Rome, with traditional state religion coexisting alongside numerous imported cults and philosophies from across the empire. Back in his apartment as evening falls, Lucius finds Dion has prepared a simple meal using ingredients already on hand, supplemented by those Lucius purchased at the market. They dine together at the small table, a common arrangement in households with few slaves, where strict separation between master and servants often gives way to more familiar relations. The meal consists of a porridge of lentils flavored with garum, the ubiquitous fermented fish sauce that seasons most Roman dishes. The vegetables Lucius purchased cooked with herbs and a bit of olive oil, bread left from the morning, and a small portion of cheese. They eat in the Roman manner, using bread to scoop up food, fingers for larger items, and small spoons for liquids. There are no forks in their world. That utensil lies centuries in the future. After dinner, as full darkness settles outside, Lucius lights an oil lamp, a simple clay vessel with a small spout to hold the wick. The flame provides minimal illumination, by modern standards, perhaps equivalent to a single candle, casting deep shadows around the room. Activities requiring good vision, reading, detailed craftwork, accounting, become difficult or impossible after nightfall. for all but the wealthiest Romans who can afford to keep numerous lamps burning. In this gentle lamplight, Lucius reviews, some writing from the day, perhaps practices musical notes on a small flute-like instrument, or simply sits in conversation with Dion, discussing events or planning for tomorrow's needs. Without electricity to power entertainment devices or artificial lighting to extend productive hours, evenings naturally become times of rest and quiet socialization. Before retiring, Lucius once again visits his lararium for a brief evening prayer. Then he prepares for sleep on his bed, a wooden frame with a mattress stuffed with wool or, in less expensive versions, straw or dried reeds. Pillows might be similarly stuffed or, for the wealthy, filled with soft down. Blankets of wool provide warmth in cooler seasons. There are no synthetic fabrics, no standardized bed sizes, no memory foam or inner spring mattresses, just natural materials arranged for basic comfort. As he settles onto this simple bed, thoughts of the day's activities gradually fade. Outside, the sounds of the city diminish, though never completely disappear, even at night. Without mechanical background noise, the human sounds of the ancient city remain present. Distant conversations, occasional laughter from a late opening tavern. The footsteps of the urban cohort patrol passing through the neighborhood to maintain order. So concludes a day in the life of Lucius Valerius, an ordinary Roman in the great imperial capital. His experiences, from morning ablutions to the forum's business, from public bathing to evening leisure, represent patterns of daily life that would have been familiar to hundreds of thousands of his contemporaries. For a modern person suddenly transplanted into his world, almost every aspect would seem simultaneously fascinating and deeply challenging. The sensory richness, the public nature of so many activities, the lack of technological conveniences, the different conception of personal space and time. The next morning would bring much the same routine, with variations for different days of the 8-day Roman market week, or for religious festivals that punctuate the calendar. This cyclical pattern, governed by natural light and long-standing civic customs, creates a rhythm of life far removed from our modern existence, yet connected to it through the shared human experiences of work, rest, nourishment, and social connection. In many ways, the ancient Romans created urban living patterns remarkably sophisticated for their time. Public services like the aqueducts and baths, legal and commercial systems of considerable complexity, cultural institutions that supported both entertainment and intellectual development. Yet daily existence remained intimately tied to physical realities that modern technology has largely overcome or transformed. The limits of human and animal power, the constraints of sunlight and seasons, the omnipresent labor required for even basic comforts. Perhaps most striking to modern sensibilities would be the fundamentally social nature of Roman daily life. From the crowded insula to the communal baths, from the busy forum to the neighborhood capona, Romans lived in constant proximity to others, with privacy, as we understand it today, being a rare luxury, even for the wealthy. Personal space, solitary reflection, independent decision-making, concepts central to modern Western identity, would have seemed unfamiliar or even undesirable to many ancient Romans, for whom proper living meant being embedded in networks of family, patrons, clients, neighbors, and fellow citizens. As the oil lamp's flame dims and Lucius drifts towards sleep, he does so as a man thoroughly of his time and place, shaped by cultural assumptions and material conditions so different from our own that true understanding requires us to temporarily set aside our modern frameworks. His Rome, sensually rich, socially complex, technologically limited, physically challenging, exists now only in archaeological remains and written accounts, yet continues to fascinate precisely because it represents both the roots of many Western institutions and a profoundly different way of experiencing daily human existence. The ancient city breathes its night rhythm, thousands of souls resting in preparation for another day of life, in the shadow of temples and monuments. Another cycle of commerce and worship, pleasure and obligation. Lucius sleeps, untroubled by the knowledge that his familiar world will someday be known only through fragments and texts, that future people will struggle to imagine the textures and experiences that constitute his normal daily reality. In this moment, Rome is not ancient but immediate, not a subject for scholarly study, but the living, breathing center of what its citizens consider the civilized world. As the stars wheel slowly above the sleeping city, as the Tiber continues its eternal flow past the 7 hills, as night watchmen call the hours and dogs bark in distant alleys, this moment in Rome, one ordinary day among centuries of days, fades into the great tapestry of human experience, both lost forever and somehow still present, echoing across the millennia, to touch the imagination of those who seek to understand lives different from yet connected to their own. As the whispers of ancient Rome fade into the gentle darkness of your room, let your mind drift across the centuries. The forum grows quiet, the oil lamps dim, and the cobblestones cool under the Mediterranean moon. As this chapter closes its eyes, another tale begins to stir. A different world awaits you in the soft shadows of history, where other voices will soon guide your journey deeper into slumber. Like marble dust catching the golden rays of a setting sun, ancient memories drift through time. The forum whispers secrets of a civilization that shaped worlds, where sandaled feet once tread paths, both magnificent and treacherous, and where the rhythm of daily life moved to the heartbeat of an empire. The morning mist settled gently over the 7 hills of Rome, diffusing the early light into a soft golden glow that caressed the marble facades of the city's grandest buildings. The year was 79 CE, during the reign of Emperor Titus, and Rome stood at the pinnacle of its glory. The sprawling metropolis housed nearly 1 million souls, its streets and alleys forming a labyrinth of humanity that would bewilder any modern visitor. Lucius Caecilius, a middle-aged merchant of modest means, stirred from his slumber as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the small window of his insular apartment. Unlike the lavish domus of the wealthy patricians, Lucius's third-floor dwelling in this multi-story tenement building offered only the basic necessities of life. The room was sparsely furnished with a simple wooden bed, a small table, and a chest containing his few possessions. The sounds of the awakening city drifted upward, the creaking of cartwheels on cobblestones, vendors setting up their stalls, and the distant calls of street hawkers preparing for another day of commerce. Lucius rose slowly, his joints protesting slightly after years of carrying heavy amphorae filled with olive oil, his primary trade good. He moved to the small basin of water that had been placed there the previous evening by his loyal servant, Dama, a freedman who had once been his slave but now worked for a modest wage. The water was cool against his skin as he performed his morning ablutions, the simple act of washing bringing a sense of ritual cleanliness that was deeply ingrained in Roman society. Dressing was a straightforward affair. Unlike the complex, layered garments that would confound a modern visitor, Lucius's daily attire consisted of a simple tunic, a rectangular piece of cloth folded and sewn together, with openings for his head and arms. For a man of his station, The tunic fell to just below his knees and was made of undyed wool, comfortable and practical for the Mediterranean climate. Had Lucius been a senator or equestrian, he would have donned a toga for formal occasions. That elaborate, semicircular woolen garment that required considerable skill to drape properly and marked one as a Roman citizen of importance. But for everyday business in the Forum, his tunic was sufficient, perhaps with a simple cloak if the weather demanded it. Breaking his fast was equally uncomplicated. Dama had already prepared a simple meal of barley porridge sweetened with honey, along with a few dried figs and a cup of watered wine. The wine was a necessity, as the water from the public fountains, despite Rome's impressive aqueduct system, was not always safe to drink without mixing it with wine, whose alcohol content helped kill harmful bacteria. Modern visitors, accustomed to coffee or tea to start their day, would find this morning beverage strange. Wine with breakfast would be considered inappropriate or even problematic in many contemporary societies. Yet in ancient Rome, it was simply practical, the diluted wine serving as both refreshment and safeguard against illness. As Lucius prepared to venture out into the city, he reached for his money pouch. The weight of coins against his hip provided a reassuring presence. He carried mostly sesterti and denarii, the common currencies of daily transactions. Unlike the uniform paper bills or standardized coins of modern times, Roman currency was a tangible, weighty presence, the value of each piece directly related to its metal content. Stepping out into the corridor of the insula, Lucius nodded to his neighbors, a patchwork of humanity that represented Rome's diversity. There was Quintus, a carpenter whose workshop occupied the ground floor, Selene, a Greek freedwoman who worked as a midwife, and several families whose daily routines mirrored his own. The insula housed people of various backgrounds and occupations, all living in close quarters with minimal privacy, sharing a common well in the courtyard and communal latrines. The stairs creaked beneath Lucius's sandaled feet as he descended to the street level. Made of wood, these stairs were often a hazard in the multi-story insulae, prone to rot and collapse, especially in the more poorly constructed buildings. Fire was an ever-present danger in these tenements, with residents using oil lamps and small braziers for light and cooking. The Great Fire during Nero's reign, less than 2 decades earlier, remained fresh in the collective memory of Rome's inhabitants. Emerging onto the street, Lucius was immediately enveloped in the sensory tapestry of urban Rome, an experience that would overwhelm modern sensibilities. The narrow street, barely wide enough for 2 carts to pass, was already bustling with activity. The sense of the city assaulted his nostrils. The yeasty aroma of fresh bread from the nearby bakery, the pungent odor of garum, fermented fish sauce, from food stalls, the earthy smell of animals and their waste, the smoke from countless cooking fires, and the not always pleasant human odors in a society where daily bathing was a luxury rather than a necessity for many. The soundscape was equally rich. Merchants shouting their wares, the clatter of wooden wheels on stone, the conversations in Latin punctuated with phrases in Greek, Aramaic, and other languages of the empire, the occasional bark of dogs foraging for scraps. From an upper window, a woman called down to a water cellar, negotiating the price of filling her household containers. As Lucius navigated the morning crowd, he was careful to stay close to the buildings. Roman streets had no dedicated pedestrian paths as we know them today, and vehicles, mostly hand-pulled or animal-drawn carts, had the right of way. Without the traffic signals and painted lines that organize modern thoroughfares, pedestrians needed constant vigilance. Additionally, with no proper sewage system beyond the main drainage channels, the center of the street often contained runoff, water and waste, making the edges the preferable walking route. Julius Caesar had banned wheeled traffic during daylight hours in the city centre to reduce congestion, but in this residential area on the edge of the Subura district, carts and wagons were still a common hazard. The wheels of these vehicles had created deep ruts in the paving stones over decades of use, evidence of the standardized axle width that persisted throughout the empire, a practical necessity for a civilization that built roads stretching thousands of miles. Lucius's destination this morning was the Forum Romanum, the beating heart of the city and empire. To reach it, he would pass through neighborhoods that showcased Rome's stark social contrasts. The route took him through the remainder of the Subura, a densely populated working-class district known for its lively and sometimes notorious character. Here, the buildings pressed close together, rising several stories high, their facades a patchwork of repairs and modifications. Street-level spaces housed taverns, workshops, and small shops, their contents spilling onto the street as proprietors sought to attract customers. Lucius passed a fuller's shop where workers stomped on soiled garments in vats of urine, a common cleaning agent due to its ammonia content. The smell was powerful but familiar, just another note in the olfactory symphony of the ancient city. As he approached the Forum, the character of the buildings gradually changed. The structures became more imposing, built of finer materials, with architectural elements that spoke of wealth and importance. The crowds too reflected this transition. More togas appeared among the tunics, and the speech became more refined, the educated Latin of the upper classes, rather than the colloquial vernacular of the Subura. Lucius paused at a small shrine, set into a wall, one of countless such religious spaces that dotted the city. He made a brief gesture of respect to the household god depicted there, not out of deep religious conviction, but from the ingrained habits of Roman life, where the boundaries between religious observance and daily routine were fluid. To a modern observer accustomed to the separation of religious and secular spaces, the ubiquitous presence of shrines, temples, and religious imagery in every corner of Roman life would seem strange indeed. Finally reaching the edge of the Forum, Lucius was greeted by the sight that never failed to inspire a sense of pride in Rome's citizens. The great public square stretched before him, surrounded by the most magnificent buildings in the known world. Temples with their columned porticos, basilicas where legal matters were settled, the Senate House where the governance of an empire was debated, all stood as testament to Roman power and permanence. The Forum was already teeming with activity. Senators in their toga praetexta with its purple border moved purposefully toward government buildings, attended by their entourage of clients and slaves. Merchants set up temporary stalls around the periphery, selling everything from writing implements to ready-to-eat food. Orators practiced their delivery in quieter corners, while legal proceedings took place in the open, drawing crowds of interested spectators. For Lucius, the Forum was a place of business. He made his way to a section frequented by traders in olive oil, where he would meet with suppliers and negotiate terms for his modest import business. His first appointment was with Titus Flavius, a freedman who represented a large estate in Baetica, the Spanish province famous for its high-quality oil. They met beside the Temple of Saturn, using its broad steps as an impromptu meeting place. No offices with comfortable chairs, climate control, or privacy awaited Roman businessmen. Commerce was conducted in the open, with handshakes and verbal agreements carrying the weight that written contracts would in later eras. "The harvest looks excellent this year," Titus informed him, his voice barely rising above the general din of the Forum. "The first pressing is already being prepared for shipment. Will you take the usual amount?" Lucius considered, mentally calculating. his storage capacity, and the demands of his regular customers. Perhaps a little more, if the quality is as good as you say. The price? What followed was a ritual of negotiation familiar to merchants across time. Offers, counter-offers, discussions of quality and timing, all conducted without the aid of computers, electronic calculators, or even paper spreadsheets. Lucius relied on mental arithmetic and years of experience to ensure the transaction would be profitable. They eventually settled on terms, sealing the agreement with a handshake and a small libation poured at a nearby altar. Another example of how religion permeated even the most practical aspects of Roman life. The oil would arrive at Ostia, Rome's port, within 2 months, carried in large ceramic amphorae on ships that would navigate the Mediterranean with only the stars, experience, and favorable winds to guide them. With his first business concluded, Lucius felt his stomach rumbling. The morning meal had worn off, and it was time for a quick repast. For a modern visitor accustomed to designated lunch hours and dedicated eating establishments, the Roman approach to the midday meal would seem curiously informal. Lucius stopped at one of the many thermopolia, essentially fast food counters, that dotted the city. These establishments featured large built-in earthenware containers embedded in a masonry counter, keeping food hot and ready to serve. He purchased a simple meal of bread, olives, and a lentil stew flavored with garum, eating it standing up, as was common practice. There were no utensils provided. Lucius used the bread to scoop up the stew, a practice that would seem unhygienic by modern standards, but was perfectly normal in his world. The meal was quick, nutritious, and affordable. Roman fast food that served the same purpose as its modern counterpart, feeding busy urbanites who couldn't return home for their meals. As Lucius ate, he observed the flow of humanity around him. A group of schoolboys followed their grammaticus, learning their letters through rote repetition. A wealthy matron passed by in a curtained litter carried by strong slaves, her brief appearance causing a stir among the pedestrians. 2 legionaries on leave from their cohort strode confidently through the crowd, their military bearing unmistakable, even in civilian dress. The diversity of Rome was on full display. Here was a city that had conquered much of the known world, bringing back not just treasure and slaves, but ideas, customs, and people from every corner of its vast domains. Lucius could hear snippets of conversation in multiple languages. See clothing styles that originated in Egypt or Judea, and smell cooking aromas from Persia and North Africa. His meal finished, Lucius decided to visit the public baths before his afternoon appointments. For a contemporary visitor, the Roman bathing ritual would perhaps be the most alien aspect of daily life. Communal, lengthy, and central to social interaction in a way that private, utilitarian modern showers could never match. He chose to visit the baths of Titus, completed just the previous year and still marveled at for their splendor. The entrance fee was modest, just a quadrans, the smallest bronze coin in circulation. This nominal fee made bathing accessible to most free citizens, an example of the public amenities that Rome provided to its urban population. Entering the baths, Lucius nodded to the attendant and proceeded to the apoditerium, the changing room. Here, he removed his tunic and sandals, placing them in a small niche. Unlike modern facilities with their secure lockers, Roman baths relied on slaves, for those who had them, or hired attendants to watch over possessions. Theft was not uncommon, and the wealthy often brought their own slaves specifically to guard their clothing and valuables. Naked, for Romans had none of the bodily modesty that later cultures would develop, Lucius proceeded to the tepidarium, a warm room that prepared the body for the higher heat to come. The air was humid and soothing, the temperature maintained by an ingenious system of hypocausts, hollow spaces beneath the floor and within the walls through which hot air from furnaces circulated. The walls and floors were clad in marble, the ceilings decorated with intricate mosaics depicting maritime scenes. Statues of gods and notable citizens stood in niches, their marble forms seeming almost alive in the diffused light that entered through high windows of translucent alabaster. Here, Lucius encountered Decimus, a fellow merchant he knew from the oil trade. They exchanged greetings and naturally fell into conversation about business conditions, political rumors, and the upcoming gladiatorial games. This casual networking was a primary function of the baths, a place where news spread, deals were discussed, and social bonds reinforced. After sufficient time in the tepidarium, Lucius moved to the caldarium, the hottest room in the bath complex. The heat here was intense, causing immediate perspiration. Attendants offered strigils, curved metal implements used to scrape oil and dirt from the skin, serving the purpose that soap would in later eras. For an additional fee, Lucius could have had a slave perform this service, but he preferred to do it himself, methodically removing the day's grime. The final stage of the bathing ritual took place in the frigidarium, where cold pools provided a bracing contrast to the heat of the previous rooms. Lucius immersed himself briefly, feeling his skin tighten and his senses sharpen with the temperature shock. Around him, other bathers chatted, exercised, or simply relaxed, turning the utilitarian practice of cleansing into a leisurely social activity that might consume several hours of the day. Refreshed and clean, Lucius dressed and prepared to leave the baths. He chose not to visit the on-site library or the exercise yard, as the afternoon was advancing and he had more business to conduct. As he departed, he pondered whether to attend the public games scheduled for the following day, a violent entertainment that would shock modern sensibilities, but was an integral part of Roman civic life and identity. Returning to the forum, Lucius conducted the remainder of his business transactions. He arranged for storage space in a warehouse near the Tiber for his incoming oil shipment, negotiated with several shopkeepers who were his regular customers, and paid a tax that had recently been assessed on his business activities. This last task required a visit to a money changer, as the tax needed to be paid in specific denominations. The Argentarius sat behind a small table, his scales and touchstone at the ready to verify the weight and purity of coins. Without banking apps or electronic transfers, every financial transaction in Rome required physical currency and often the services of these specialized money handlers. As the afternoon waned, Lucius made one final stop at a small temple dedicated to Mercury, patron of merchants. He was not particularly devout, but like most Romans, he observed the formal requirements of religion as a matter of course. He purchased a small offering from a vendor outside the temple, a honey cake, and presented it at the altar with a brief formulaic prayer for continued prosperity. The priest acknowledged his offering with a nod, one of hundreds such transactions he would oversee that day. Roman religion was transactional in nature. Worshippers performed the correct rituals and made appropriate offerings, and in return, the gods were expected to provide their favor. It was a pragmatic approach to spirituality that reflected the practical Roman mindset. With his business and religious obligations complete, Lucius turned his steps homeward as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The streets were as busy as they had been in the morning, though the character of the crowd had changed. Day laborers returned from work sites, slaves ran last-minute errands for their masters, and the first of the evening revelers began to appear at tavern doorways. As Lucius navigated the familiar route home, he became aware of a commotion ahead. A small crowd had gathered around a public fountain where water flowed continuously from bronze spouts, part of Rome's remarkable water distribution system. Drawing closer, he saw that one of the lead pipes feeding the fountain had burst, sending water cascading across the street. Already, workers from the nearest Vigiles station, the corps responsible for firefighting and basic public order, were on the scene, directing people away from the flooded area. A messenger had been dispatched to notify the Aquarius, the official, responsible for this section of the water system. Repairs would likely begin by morning. This minor infrastructure failure was a reminder of both Rome's engineering achievements and the constant maintenance they required. The city's aqueducts brought millions of gallons of fresh water daily from distant sources, feeding public fountains, baths, wealthy homes, and public buildings through an extensive network of lead pipes. It was a system that would not be equaled in Europe for over a millennium after Rome's fall. Detouring around the flooded street, Lucius continued homeward through the gathering dusk. Oil lamps began to appear in windows, their flickering light offering islands of illumination in the darkening city. Unlike modern urban centers with their ubiquitous electric lighting, nighttime in Rome transformed the cityscape dramatically, hiding its flaws and dangers in deep shadows. The prudent citizen hurried to reach his destination before full dark, as Rome's streets became considerably more dangerous after nightfall. Without a police force in the modern sense, night security was minimal. Wealthy citizens traveled with escorts of slaves bearing torches. But for the average Roman like Lucius, the safest strategy was simply to be indoors when night fell completely. Reaching his insula, Lucius climbed the now familiar stairs, acknowledging neighbors returning from their own daily activities. The building settled into its evening rhythm, with cooking smells permeating the hallways and the sounds of domestic life. Conversations, children's voices, the occasional bark of a small dog kept as a pet, creating a background murmur. Dama had prepared a simple dinner in anticipation of his master's return. A vegetable stew with a small portion of salt fish, bread, olives, and wine. By modern standards, it was a surprisingly Mediterranean diet, with fresh ingredients that were available seasonally and preserved foods that could be stored without refrigeration. Lucius ate his meal reclining on a simple couch in an approximation of the formal dining posture of the elite, who took their elaborate meals while reclining on 3 couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. His modest apartment couldn't accommodate such formal dining arrangements, but the reclining posture was ingrained in Roman eating habits across social classes. As he ate, he perused a letter that had arrived during his absence, brought by a friend returning from Campania. Without a postal service, personal correspondence traveled via the goodwill of travelers heading in the right direction, making communication slow and unreliable by modern standards. The letter, written on papyrus in a careful hand, contained family news and took nearly 2 weeks to reach him from a town less than 100 miles away. With dinner complete and the day's business concluded, Lucius prepared for sleep. The oil lamp cast shifting shadows on the walls as he performed his evening ablutions and changed into a simple sleeping tunic. Unlike the rigid schedule of modern life, divided into work and leisure by the clock, Roman daily rhythms followed, the natural cycle of daylight, with most people retiring not long after sunset and rising with the dawn. As Lucius settled onto his bed, a wooden frame with a stuffed mattress, quite different from the engineered sleep systems of the modern world, he reflected briefly on the day's activities. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities in this city that was both the height of ancient civilization and, to modern eyes, startlingly primitive in many ways. The sounds of the city diminished gradually, but never disappeared entirely. Even in the deepest hours of night, Rome maintained a low hum of activity. The patrol of the vigiles watching for fires, bakers beginning their work for the morning bread, the occasional shout or burst of laughter from a late night. Reveille. It was the continuous heartbeat of the eternal city, pulsing through the darkness until dawn would once again illuminate its marble magnificence. The night deepened around the sleeping form of Lucius, one man among a million in the greatest city the world had yet known. In his ordinary life could be read the extraordinary achievement of Roman civilization, its remarkable urban planning, its complex social structures, its global trade networks, its technological innovations, yet also evident were its limitations. The vast gulf between rich and poor, the dependency on human and animal power, the capriciousness of its justice, the omnipresent threat of disease and disaster. Rome slumbered beneath a canopy of stars, much as it had for centuries and would for centuries more. The eternal city breathed with the collective exhalations of its citizens, from the humblest slave to the emperor himself. In its stones was written the story of human striving for order, beauty, and meaning, a story that continues to echo across the millennia to our own time. Within the walls of his modest apartment, Lucius dreamed perhaps of prosperous business ventures or pleasant hours at the baths, unaware that his ordinary life in this extraordinary time would one day be the subject of such fascination. He slept the sleep of a man content in the familiar patterns of his existence, patterns that would become increasingly alien to the generations that followed. The Forum stood silent now in the moonlight, its marble columns casting long shadows across the paving stones. The temples to Jupiter, Saturn, and Vesta watched over the sleeping city, as they had for generations and would for generations to come. In those hours of darkness, Rome appeared most eternal, most removed from the transitory concerns of individual lives. Yet even as the city slept, changes were occurring beyond its awareness. Far away on the frontiers, pressures built that would eventually overwhelm even Roman might. Within its social structures, transformations were underway that would reshape its spiritual landscape. In the seemingly immutable patterns of Roman life lay the seeds of profound change. But for this night, for Lucius and his fellow citizens, Rome was simply home, complex, challenging, occasionally dangerous, but familiar in its rhythms and demands. They navigated its physical and social topography with the unconscious skill of natives, unaware of how strange their normal would seem to observers from another time. As the moon traced its path across the sky, as the night watchman called the hours, as the eternal city breathed deeply in its slumber, the gap between ancient and modern seemed both unbridgeably wide and surprisingly narrow. In Lucius's concerns for his business, his attention to social connections, his enjoyment of life's pleasures, and his wariness of its dangers, we recognize our common humanity across the chasm of time. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, the same stars that shine upon our world, connecting us to that ancient night in the eternal city, where one man among many slept, dreamed, and prepared to rise again to another day in the heart of the Roman Empire. Let us now drift gently into the next forgotten story, where the marble columns give way to new wonders, and the whispers of the past beckon us toward another doorway in time. Beneath the whispers of forgotten gods and the long shadows of marble columns, ancient Rome breathes in its eternal slumber. The Forum's stones hold memories of sandaled feet, while time-worn streets remember the gentle passage of history's greatest empire, a place where dreams and reality blur into the soft edges of antiquity. As twilight descended upon the sprawling expanse of Rome, the Forum Romanum, once the beating heart of the ancient empire, settled into a gentle hush. The marble columns cast long, elegant shadows across the weathered stone pathways, their silhouettes stretching like phantom fingers, reaching toward the past. It was the hour when the day's business concluded, when the merchants and politicians, the slaves and citizens began their journey homeward, and when the ancient city transformed from a place of commerce and governance to one of quiet reflection and domestic warmth. The soft golden light of the setting sun bathed the Temple of Saturn in a honeyed glow, illuminating the worn inscriptions that had witnessed centuries of Roman life pass before them. Time had been both kind and cruel to these monuments, kind in preserving their essence, cruel in the slow erosion of their grandeur. Yet there remained an undeniable dignity in their weathered facades, a silent testimony to the empire that had once ruled the known world from this very spot. A gentle breeze whispered through the Forum, carrying with it the mingled sense of distant cooking fires, Mediterranean cypress, and the ever-present hint of olive oil that perfumed the Roman air. The breeze stirred the leaves of laurel trees planted along the sacred way, creating a soft, rustling lullaby that seemed to speak of ancient ceremonies and long-forgotten triumphs. In the distance, a solitary figure, a senator named Lucius Caelius, Metellus, walked slowly across the Forum. His toga, edged with the purple stripe of his office, swayed gently with each measured step. Lucius had served Rome for over 2 decades, his hair now streaked with silver, his face lined with the wisdom that comes only through years of negotiation and compromise in the Senate House. Tonight, as was his custom, he lingered in the Forum after the day's proceedings, finding peace in these moments of solitude among the monuments of his ancestors. Lucius paused beside the rostra, the speaker's platform from which countless orations had shaped the destiny of Rome. He ran his hand over the smooth, worn marble, feeling the subtle indentations left by generations of senators who had stood there before him. The stone felt cool against his palm, a tangible connection to the unbroken line of Roman governance that stretched back through the centuries. Not far from where Lucius stood, a slave named Demetrius waited patiently, holding a small oil lamp that would guide his master home as darkness fell. Demetrius was Greek by birth, brought to Rome as a young man after his city-state had fallen to Roman legions. Unlike many slaves, he had found a measure of contentment in the household of Lucius, a fair master who valued Demetrius for his literacy and philosophical mind. Over the years, their relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship, though always constrained by the immutable boundaries of Roman society. The Forum began to empty as the last rays of sunlight retreated from the temples and basilicas. The daily rhythm of Roman life followed the sun with faithful precision, rising with the dawn and settling with the dusk, a pattern unchanged for centuries. Oil lamps appeared like floating stars as attendants lit the way for their masters, creating a constellation of gentle light across the darkening expanse. As Lucius and Demetrius departed the Forum, they passed the Temple of Vesta, where the sacred flame, symbol of Rome's eternal spirit, burned without interruption. The Vestal virgins, priestesses devoted to tending this flame, moved with quiet grace behind the temple walls, their white garments occasionally visible through columned porticos. Their dedication to preserving the flame mirrored Rome's unwavering commitment to tradition and continuity, values that anchored the empire through turbulent centuries of growth and change. The pair followed the Via Sacra, the sacred way, which wound from the Forum toward the Palatine Hill, where many of Rome's wealthiest citizens made their homes. The street was paved with large, smooth stones, fitted together with remarkable precision, a testament to Roman engineering that had created roads connecting the far reaches of the empire. These same stones had felt the weight of triumphal processions, of returning legions laden with spoils of war, of emperors and slaves alike. Shops and tabernae lined the way, most now closed for the evening, their wooden shutters secured against the night. A few remained open, taverns primarily, where the glow of lamps and the murmur of conversation spilled onto the street. The scent of wine mingled with the aroma of garum, the fermented fish sauce that seasoned nearly every Roman meal, creating an olfactory landscape as distinctive as the architectural one. Lucius nodded occasionally to acquaintances they passed. A fellow senator, a merchant who supplied his household, the owner of a bathhouse he frequented. Each exchange was governed by the intricate social protocols that determined every interaction in Roman society. A slight inclination of the head for those of lower status, a more respectful acknowledgement for equals, a deferential pause for those few who ranked above him. As they ascended the gentle slope of the Palatine, the sounds of the city below grew more distant. Here, the domus of the wealthy stood in dignified repose, their plain exterior walls giving little hint of the opulence that lay within. Roman homes turned inward, reserving their beauty for the family and guests rather than displaying it to the street, a physical manifestation of the Roman value of gravitas, the serious dignity expected of citizens of standing. The domus of Lucius Caelius Metellus was neither the largest nor the most ornate on the Palatine, but it bore the quiet elegance of a family whose roots in Rome stretched back to the early Republic. Its entrance was marked by a simple portico, leading to a wooden door reinforced with bronze. Demetrius stepped forward to announce their arrival, and the ostiarius, the doorkeeper, swung open the heavy door, bowing slightly as Lucius entered. The atrium welcomed them with its central impluvium, a shallow pool designed to collect rainwater from the opening in the roof above. The water's surface reflected the flickering light from oil lamps placed in wall niches, creating a dance of light and shadow across the frescoed walls. These paintings depicted scenes from Roman mythology: Jupiter among the clouds, Mercury, with his winged sandals, Venus rising from the sea, rendered in the rich reds, blues, and golds favored by Roman artists. The household had been anticipating their master's return. Slaves moved with quiet efficiency, some preparing the evening meal in the culina at the rear of the house, others refreshing the oil in lamps or adjusting the folds of drapery between rooms. The domus hummed with the subtle rhythm of domestic life, a microcosm of the ordered society that Romans had created throughout their territories. Lucius's wife, Livia, emerged from the tablinum, where she had been reviewing household accounts with the assistance of a trusted scribe. Though women in Rome could not participate in public political life, many, like Livia, wielded considerable influence within the domestic sphere. She managed the household with skill and diplomacy, overseeing the slaves, maintaining family finances, and ensuring that the reputation of the Metelli remained untarnished. The Senate concluded late today, Lucius observed, allowing a slave to remove his toga, a garment as symbolic as it was cumbersome, its proper draping a sign of Roman citizenship and status. There was much to discuss, Livia responded, her voice carrying the cultured tones of a woman raised in a household that valued education, even for daughters. Our son sent a letter from Capua. He writes that his studies progress well. The mention of their son, Marcus, brought a rare smile to Lucius's typically reserved features. The young man was studying rhetoric and law, preparing for the political career that awaited him as the son of a senator. The careful cultivation of the next generation was a duty taken seriously by Roman parents of their class. The empire's future would one day rest in hands like those of Marcus. As twilight deepened into night, the household gathered in the triclinium, the dining room, where 3 couches were arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Here, Roman dining customs dictated that free men reclined while eating, supported by cushions, while women sat and slaves remained standing to serve. The hierarchy of Roman society was expressed even in the intimate act of sharing a meal. The cena, the main meal of the day, began with gustatio, appetizers of olives, eggs, and small fish dressed with olive oil and herbs. Servants moved silently between the kitchen and dining room, bringing dishes and refilling cups of watered wine. Roman custom frowned upon drinking undiluted wine, considering it a mark of barbarian excess rather than civilized restraint. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine, touching on matters of state, family business, and the eternal gossip that animated Roman social circles. Lucius shared news from the Senate, discussions about grain shipments from Egypt, reports from the northern frontiers, and the latest pronouncements from the imperial palace. Though the emperor resided in Rome, direct mentions of his policies were couched in careful terms, for even walls could have ears in a city where political fortunes might rise or fall on a whispered word. After the main course of roasted fowl, with pine nuts and garum sauce accompanied by bread and vegetables, came the secundae mensae, the dessert course of fresh and dried fruits, nuts, and sweet wine. As they dined, a Greek slave with a talent for the lyre played softly in the corner, the gentle melody enhancing but never overwhelming the conversation. When the meal concluded, Lucius retired to the tablinum with a scroll recently acquired from a merchant dealing in manuscripts from Alexandria. The room served as both his office and personal library, its walls lined with niches holding scrolls on law, history, philosophy, and poetry. A bronze lamp cast a warm glow over the papyrus as Lucius settled onto a chair, unwinding the scroll to continue his reading of Cicero's thoughts on governance and virtue. Meanwhile, Livia oversaw the clearing of the dining room and gave instructions for the following day's meals and household tasks. The efficient management of domestic affairs was no small achievement in a society where virtually everything was made by hand and required careful planning. From the weaving of cloth to the preservation of food, from the maintenance of the heating system beneath the floors to the procurement of oil for lamps, each aspect of daily life depended on human labor and ingenuity. As the night deepened, the household gradually quieted. Slaves retired to their quarters. Small rooms off the kitchen or service areas, simple spaces where they might sleep on straw pallets or narrow cots. The more fortunate among them, like Demetrius, had private corners where they could keep personal possessions or even books, small assertions of individuality within the constraints of their status. In their cubiculum, their bedchamber, Lucius and Livia prepared for sleep on a bed framed in wood and supported by woven straps, topped with a wool-stuffed mattress and linen sheets. The room was simply decorated, with frescoed walls depicting pastoral scenes, a visual escape from urban life that emphasized the Roman idealization of rural simplicity, even as they created one of history's greatest cities. Before retiring, they performed small devotions at the household lararium, a shrine to the family's ancestral spirits and protective deities. This daily ritual connected them to generations past and sought blessing for the night to come. Roman religious practice wove through every aspect of daily life, a tapestry of observances that ranged from these private household rituals to grand public ceremonies in the forum's temples. As Lucius extinguished the lamp, darkness enveloped the room, broken only by thin slivers of moonlight filtering through the small window high on the wall. The sounds of the city had diminished to a distant murmur, the occasional call of a night watchman, the barking of dogs, the muted conversations of those whose business or pleasure kept them from their beds, while the senator and his wife drifted towards sleep in their comfortable chamber on the Palatine Hill, across the city, in the crowded insular apartment buildings of the Subura district. A different aspect of Roman life unfolded. These multi-story structures housed the majority of Rome's population, with families often confined to 1 or 2 rooms. Built of brick and timber, many insulae rose 5 or 6 stories high, their upper levels accessible only by precarious wooden stairs. In one such building, a baker named Titus Valerius Primus lay awake, calculating the flour he would need for the following day's bread. Unlike Lucius, who would rise well after dawn, Titus would begin his work in the deep night, preparing his oven and mixing dough by lamplight. His small bakery on the ground floor of the insula supplied bread to nearby shops and street vendors, his days measured not by Senate meetings, but by the rhythm of kneading, baking, and selling. His wife, Antonia, slept beside him, her breathing soft in the darkness. Their 2 children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 4, shared a pallet in the corner of the room. The family's entire living space was smaller than Lucius's tablinum alone, yet within these confined quarters they had created a life with its own dignity and purpose. The apartment held few possessions: a table and stools, cooking utensils, a chest containing their clothing, clay lamps, and a small shrine to Mercury, patron of merchants and commerce. The walls were whitewashed rather than frescoed, though Antonia had painted simple decorative borders in red and yellow ochre, bringing a touch of beauty to their modest home. Unlike the domus of the wealthy, which were self-contained worlds with private water supplies and heating systems, life in an insula required constant interaction with the public realm. Water came from public fountains, necessitating daily trips with earthenware jugs. Without private baths or latrines, residents relied on public facilities, making even the most personal aspects of life communal experiences. The thin walls of the apartment carried sounds from neighboring units: a baby crying, a couple arguing, someone singing softly to themselves. These buildings were vertical communities where the boundaries between public and private blurred, where the dramas and mundane details of hundreds of lives played out in close proximity. As Titus finally surrendered to sleep, his last thoughts were not of politics or philosophy, but of the practical concerns that would greet him with the new day. Whether his supplier would deliver the promised grain, whether the weather would affect his oven's temperature, whether sales would be sufficient to set aside a little toward his daughter's dowry. Between the Palatine and the Subura, in workshops and warehouses throughout the city, slaves continued, working through the night hours. In a fullery near the Circus Maximus, men stood in large vats of stale urine, treading cloth to clean it, the ammonia from the liquid breaking down dirt and grease. The work was unpleasant, but essential in a society where wool garments required regular cleaning and treatment. In dockyards along the Tiber, crews unloaded ships that had arrived from Egypt, Spain, and Gaul, transferring amphorae of wine and oil, sacks of grain, and crates of luxury goods onto wagons that would deliver them throughout the city when morning came. Rome's 1 million inhabitants required a constant flow of supplies, an estimated 300,000 tons of grain annually just to provide the basic bread ration. Near the Campus Martius, scribes worked by lamplight in government offices, copying documents and preparing reports for administrative officials. The empire's bureaucracy generated an endless stream of paperwork, tax records, military rosters, judicial decisions, and correspondence between Rome and its far-flung provinces. In taverns and popinae, simple eateries that served hot food and drink, the last customers lingered over cups of wine. These establishments provided important social spaces for those whose cramped living quarters offered little room for entertaining. Here, laborers and artisans, freed slaves and foreigners, found community and relaxation after long workdays. Even in the night hours, Rome never truly slept. The city's rhythms merely shifted, the daytime bustle of commerce and governance giving way to the quieter but equally vital activities that maintained urban life. The empire's capital was an organism requiring constant attention. Its water supply monitored by equerri who inspected aqueducts and cisterns, its security maintained by the vigiles who served as both firefighters and night watchmen, its streets occasionally patrolled by urban cohorts who enforced public order. As the middle hours of the night passed, a profound change came over the city. For a brief span, between the last revelers seeking their beds and the first bakers lighting their ovens, Rome found something approaching silence. The great public spaces, the forum, the markets, the baths, stood empty, moonlight washing over monuments that would soon be thronged with humanity. In this rare quiet, the eternal city revealed another face, not the Rome of power and glory, celebrated in official histories, nor the Rome of daily commerce and domestic life, but a Rome of shadows and stillness, of ancient stones breathing under starlight, of history's weight pressing down on sleeping streets. This momentary pause soon yielded to the first stirrings of a new day. In the east, beyond the Esquiline hill, the sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly. Roosters sensed the approaching dawn before human eyes could detect it, their calls creating a rippling alarm across neighborhoods. In temples throughout the city, priests rose for morning rituals, preparing offerings to gods who had watched over Rome since its founding centuries before. Titus the baker was among the first citizens to begin his day's labor, kindling the fire in his oven while his family still slept. The heat would build slowly, the bricks absorbing and radiating warmth until they reached the precise temperature needed for his loaves. His movements were practiced and efficient, hands shaping dough in patterns repeated thousands of times over the years. As the baker worked, the city gradually awakened around him. Street vendors prepared carts of vegetables, fruits, and hot foods to sell to workers heading to their shops and offices. Water carriers filled their vessels at public fountains, preparing to deliver to households willing to pay for the convenience. Shopkeepers raised shutters, artisans uncovered works in progress, and teachers welcomed the first sleepy students of the day. On the Palatine, the household of Lucius Caelius Metellus stirred more slowly. Slaves rose first, rekindling hearth fires, preparing the morning meal, and attending to their assigned duties. The atrium's impluvium was cleaned, fresh flowers arranged in strategic locations, and the entrance swept in anticipation of the day's visitors. When Lucius himself rose, a slave was waiting with fresh water for washing and a light meal of bread, cheese, and watered wine. Unlike some of his contemporaries who adopted Greek customs of elaborate morning grooming, Lucius maintained the older Roman tradition of simplicity in his personal habits, a conscious choice that aligned with his political image as a man of traditional virtue. Dressed in a fresh tunic and toga, he prepared to return to the forum for another day of senatorial business. Before departing, he visited the household shrine, offering a brief prayer to the familial gods and the spirit of his father, whose political wisdom still guided him years after the elder Metellus had joined the ancestors. As Lucius and Demetrius made their way down the Palatine toward the Forum, they joined streams of citizens flowing toward the center of Roman public life. The early morning light cast long shadows across the city, illuminating the upper stories of buildings while leaving streets in cool shade. The air felt fresh, not yet heavy with the day's cooking fires, human activity, and summer heat. The Forum gradually filled with people of all classes and occupations. Senators in togas with purple borders greeted one another before proceeding to the Curia for the day's session. Merchants arranged their wares in shops surrounding the main square. Clients gathered to pay morning respects to their patrons, reinforcing the social bonds that structured Roman society. Ordinary citizens came to hear public announcements, witness judicial proceedings, or simply absorb the energy of Rome's political heart. Near the temple of Castor and Pollux, money changers set up their tables, ready to exchange foreign coins for Roman currency or arrange financial transactions for merchants and travelers. The empire's vast territories brought a diversity of peoples and currencies to the capital, requiring specialists to determine values and authenticate coins from distant provinces. By mid-morning, the Forum hummed with activity. Orators addressed gathered crowds from the rostra, their trained voices projecting across the space. Scribes recorded testimonies in the basilica, where legal matters were adjudicated. Priests performed rituals at various temples, maintaining the Pax Deorum, the peace with the gods, that Romans believed essential to their continued prosperity. While the business of governance proceeded in the Forum, a different kind of activity filled the markets of Rome. In the Macellum, the main food market, vendors arranged displays of vegetables, fruits, and herbs brought from farms in the surrounding countryside. Fishmongers offered their catches from the Mediterranean, displayed on beds of crushed ice carried down from mountain regions at considerable expense. Butchers prepared cuts of pork, lamb, and occasionally beef, though meat remained a luxury that many citizens enjoyed only during public festivals. The sounds of commerce filled these spaces, haggling over prices, calls advertising particular goods, the clinking of coins, changing hands. The markets were democratic spaces where aristocratic matrons shopping with their slaves might brush shoulders with ordinary citizens seeking the day's provisions. Here, the practical matter of feeding Rome's enormous population took precedence over social distinctions, though even in this setting, wealth determined access to the finest goods. By midday, as the sun reached its zenith, the rhythm of the city shifted again. Many businesses closed temporarily during the hottest hours, their owners and workers retreating home for the prandium, a light meal, and often a brief rest. This practical adaptation to the Mediterranean climate created a daily pause in urban activity, a collective breath before the afternoon's resumption of commerce and social engagements. For those who could afford the entrance fee, the public baths offered respite from the heat and an opportunity for social interaction. These magnificent complexes, some built by emperors to demonstrate their generosity to the populace, contained not only bathing facilities, but also exercise grounds, libraries, gardens, and spaces for conversation and relaxation. In the baths of Trajan, citizens progressed through a sequence of rooms designed to cleanse both body and spirit, beginning in the apoditerium, where they removed clothing and left valuables with slaves or attendants. Bathers moved to the tepidarium with its pleasant warmth, then to the caldarium, where intense heat opened the pores, and finally to the frigidarium, where cool pools refreshed overheated skin. The baths served functions far beyond hygiene. Here, business was discussed, friendships cultivated, and social networks maintained. Politicians courted popular support, intellectuals debated philosophical points, and ordinary citizens absorbed the latest news and gossip. The architecture itself, soaring domes, marble columns, intricate mosaics, and statuary, provided a daily reminder of Rome's wealth and engineering prowess, accessible to citizens of modest means who might never enter a senator's domus or imperial palace. As the afternoon progressed, the city returned to full activity. In workshops throughout Rome, artisans continued their skilled labor, potters shaping clay on wheels, glassblowers creating delicate vessels, metalworkers hammering bronze and silver into utensils and ornaments. These crafts passed from master to apprentice, maintaining traditions, while gradually incorporating new techniques or designs influenced by the empire's expanding territories. The streets filled again with the movement of goods and people. Donkey carts laden with building materials navigated narrow alleys, contributing to the constant renewal and expansion of the urban landscape. Couriers carried messages between government offices, private homes, and commercial establishments, their swift movement essential in a world without electronic communication. In the Forum, the Senate session continued through the afternoon, with Lucius and his colleagues debating matters ranging from provincial appointments to treasury allocations. The procedures followed traditions established over centuries, with strict protocols governing who might speak, in what order, and for how long. These formal constraints on discourse reflected the Roman belief in order and hierarchy as foundations of effective governance. As the sun began its westward descent, casting golden light across the temples and basilicas, the Forum's activities gradually wound down. Scribes gathered their materials, merchants secured their shops, and senators emerged from the Curia, often gathering in small groups to continue discussions begun in the formal session. Throughout the city, people turned their thoughts toward home and the evening meal, the most significant social occasion in the Roman day. Households of all social levels placed importance on this time of gathering, though the nature of the meal varied dramatically depending on resources. While a senator's family might enjoy multiple courses served by a staff of specialized slaves, a craftsman's family might share a simple meal of vegetable stew and bread, perhaps with small portions of cheese or preserved fish. As darkness fell once more over the 7 hills, the eternal city completed another cycle in its ancient rhythm. From the grandeur of the Palatine to the crowded tenements of the Subura, from the political arena of the Forum to the humble bakeries and workshops that sustained daily life, Rome encompassed a world of experience bound together by shared traditions, laws, and beliefs. In his domus on the Palatine, Lucius Caelius Metellus sat in his garden courtyard, listening to the distant sounds of the city settling into evening. Despite his position and privileges, he remained aware that he was but one thread in the vast tapestry of Roman civilization. A civilization that had endured for centuries before his birth and would continue long after he joined his ancestors. In memory. In this understanding lay a profound truth about ancient Rome. Its greatness resided not merely in magnificent buildings or military conquests, but in the resilient fabric of daily life that bound citizens high and low in common purpose. From dawn to dusk, from the rhythms of household rituals to the grandeur of public ceremonies, Romans participated in a shared cultural identity that transcended individual lifespans, creating a legacy that would influence human civilization for millennia to come. As twilight deepened into night once more, and oil lamps cast their gentle glow across the sleeping city, Rome continued its eternal conversation between past and present, between tradition and innovation, between the human desire for meaning and the ceaseless flow of time. In this ongoing dialogue lay the true essence of Roman civilization, not frozen in marble monuments, but alive in the breathing, dreaming continuity of urban life. Let us now drift gently into the next forgotten story, where ancient whispers carry us to another corner of Rome's vast tapestry, where new shadows wait to share their timeless secrets. Between marble columns and whispering fountains, ancient Rome awaits with open arms. As twilight bathes the 7 hills in amber light, forgotten echoes call from centuries past. Come, wander through the eternal city's gentle embrace, where time slows and history breathes with quiet rhythm. The morning light crept gently across the 7 hills of Rome, painting the ancient stones in hues of gold and amber. It was the hour when the city awakened, stretching its marble limbs as it had done for centuries before. The air held a particular quality at this time, a certain stillness that would soon give way to the soft murmur of daily life. In these precious moments, one could almost hear the whispers of history carried on the gentle breeze, stories woven into the very fabric of the eternal city. Along the Via Sacra, the sacred way that wound through the heart of the Roman Forum, a few early risers moved with unhurried steps. Their sandals made soft sounds against the smooth, worn stones, stones that had felt the tread of emperors and slaves alike. A temple attendant carried fresh water in a clay vessel, the liquid catching the light as it swayed with each measured step. Soon, the first tendrils of incense would rise from the Temple of Vesta, where the sacred flame had been tended without interruption for hundreds of years. In a modest domus near the Aventine Hill, a family was beginning their day as countless Roman families had done before them. The paterfamilias, Lucius Valerius, a man of middle years with kind eyes and a philosophical disposition, stood in the small courtyard of his home. He breathed deeply, taking in the scent of the cypress tree that grew in the center, its branches reaching toward the rectangle of blue sky above. The impluvium beneath it collected the morning dew, reflecting the world above in its still surface. His wife, Livia, moved through the atrium with practiced grace, directing the household slaves with gentle words rather than commands. Her hands were always in motion, adjusting a fold of fabric here, straightening a small statuette of the household gods there. The lararium, a small shrine dedicated to these protective deities, occupied a place of honor in the atrium. Livia placed a small offering of honey and wheat before the painted figures, her lips moving in a prayer as ancient as Rome itself. Their children still slumbered in their small cubicula, rooms barely large enough for a narrow bed and a small chest for their belongings. The youngest, a girl of 7 named Julia, clutched a doll made of cloth and straw, its features worn from years of loving attention. Her brother, Marcus, 2 years her senior, had fallen asleep with a wax tablet nearby, his lessons half completed. The family's elderly slave, Hermes, who had been with them for so long he was considered more a member of the family than a servant, kindled the hearth fire. His gnarled hands moved with surprising dexterity as he coaxed the flames to life. The fire would warm the morning bread, flat and simple, which would be dipped in olive oil and perhaps sprinkled with a few precious grains of salt if the day was special. As the sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the terracotta roof tiles, the city of Rome continued its gentle awakening. The Forum, once the political heart of an empire that stretched across 3 continents, welcomed the first visitors of the day. Merchants arranged their wares in the tabernae, the small shops that lined the great square. Bolts of fabric in colors, extracted from shells and plants, pottery from local kilns and exotic workshops across the sea, spices that had traveled thousands of miles along ancient trade routes, all found their place in this grand marketplace of humanity. The bakers had been at work since well before dawn, their ovens radiating warmth into the cool morning air. The scent of fresh bread mingled with the earthy aroma of the city itself. Stone and timber, humanity and history, all bound together in an olfactory tapestry that had remained largely unchanged for generations. A group of senators in their pristine togas with purple borders moved through the forum toward the curia, where matters of state would be discussed with measured words and ancient protocols. Their voices carried softly across the open space, a gentle rhythm of Latin phrases rising and falling like the tide. They greeted each other with formal phrases and subtle gestures, a choreography of status and respect honed over centuries of political tradition. Near the Temple of Saturn, a philosopher had gathered a small group of students, seated on simple stone benches. They listened as he spoke of virtue and wisdom, of living in accordance with nature and finding peace in simplicity. His words drifted through the morning air, blending with the soft cooing of doves that nested in the temple pediments above. "Consider the stone," the philosopher was saying, holding a small piece of marble in his weathered palm. "It does not struggle against its nature. It simply exists as it is meant to exist. There is wisdom in this acceptance, a tranquility that comes from understanding one's place in the great mosaic of existence." The students nodded, some making notes on wax tablets with their styluses, others simply absorbing the words like the marble columns absorbed the warming sunlight. Among them was a young man named Titus, the son of a wealthy merchant who had sent him to Rome from Ostia to complete his education. His eyes darted occasionally to the activity in the forum, still new enough to the great city to be distracted by its endless tableau of human experience. As midday approached, the rhythm of the city shifted subtly. Many shops would close for a few hours as Romans retreated from the heat of the day. Some would return home for a simple meal, and perhaps a brief rest. Others would make their way to the public baths, where the ritual of cleansing was as much social as it was hygienic. The baths of Caracalla stood as a monument to Roman engineering and the culture's appreciation for the pleasures of water and warmth. Covering nearly 25 acres, the massive complex could accommodate thousands of bathers at once. Mosaics depicting ocean scenes lined the pools, their tiny coloured tiles creating images that seemed to ripple and move with the gentle motion of the water. Inside, the progression of rooms offered a journey from cool to warm to hot, and then back again. The frigidarium, with its cool, refreshing pools, welcomed those who had just exercised in the palestra. The tepidarium provided a gentle transition, its moderate warmth preparing the body for what was to come. And then, the caldarium, the hottest room, where steam rose from the heated floors and walls, opening the pores and drawing out impurities. A senator named Quintus Aurelius Symmachus reclined on a marble bench in the tepidarium, engaged in quiet conversation with a poet whose verses had recently gained favour in the literary circles of Rome. Their voices barely rose above the gentle splashing of water and the soft echoes that filled the vaulted space. "Your latest work reminds me of Virgil in its pastoral imagery," the senator was saying, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on the marble beside him. "There is a quality of longing in it, a remembrance of simpler times." The poet, a man of slight build with observant eyes, nodded in acknowledgement of the compliment. "I find that in these days, people yearn for the tranquility of the countryside, even as they embrace the conveniences of urban life." It is the eternal contradiction of Roman existence. Their conversation drifted to other topics: the latest shipments of grain from Egypt, the upcoming festival of Saturnalia, the rumors of a particularly talented gladiator who fought with the grace of a dancer rather than the brutality of a warrior. Through it all, their tones remained measured and thoughtful, the steam from the baths seeming to soften not just their bodies, but their words as well. In another section of the baths, reserved for women during certain hours, Livia and her daughter, Julia, had completed their bathing ritual and were now in the hands of a skilled ornatrix, a female slave specialized in hairdressing. The ornatrix's nimble fingers worked through Julia's dark hair, creating a simple style appropriate for a young girl of good family. For Livia, the arrangement would be more elaborate, with braids coiled and pinned to create a structure that spoke of dignity and status without ostentation. "Will there be music at the dinner tonight, Mother?" Julia asked, trying to sit still despite her excitement. "Yes. Your father has arranged for a flute player and a young man who sings the old songs," Livia replied, her voice gentle. "But remember what we discussed about the behavior expected of a Roman girl at such gatherings?" Julia nodded solemnly. "I am to speak only when spoken to eat modestly, and to observe everything so that I might learn the proper ways." Livia smiled, reaching out to touch her daughter's cheek affectionately. "And one day, when you preside over your own household, you will teach your daughters these same lessons, as my mother taught me, and her mother before her. This is how we maintain the mus maiorum, the ways of our ancestors." As the afternoon progressed, artisans throughout the city continued their work with practiced hands. In a small workshop near the Tiber, a mosaic maker named Demetrius, originally from Greece but long established in Rome, bent over his current commission. Thousands of tiny tesserae, small cubes of stone, glass, and ceramic, were being assembled into an intricate scene depicting the 4 seasons. The work required patience and precision, each piece placed with deliberate care to create a whole that would endure for generations. Demetrius hummed softly as he worked, an old melody from his homeland. His apprentice, a Roman boy of 14, named Gaius, sorted the tesserae by color and handed them to his master as needed. The workshop was filled with a quality of light that seemed to make the colors more vivid. Blues as deep as the Mediterranean, greens that captured the essence of spring leaves, reds and yellows that spoke of autumn harvests and summer sunsets. "Do you see how this blue changes when placed beside this particular green?" Demetrius asked his apprentice, holding up 2 small pieces. "This is the secret that cannot be taught, only observed and felt. The tesserae speak to each other, creating a conversation of color that tells a story beyond the mere image." Gaius nodded, his young face serious with concentration. He had been apprenticed to Demetrius for 2 years now, and each day brought new insights into the art that would eventually become his livelihood. His hands were already developing the calluses and subtle strength required for this meticulous work. Across the city, in the kitchen of Lucius Valerius's home, preparations were underway for the evening meal. The cook, a skilled slave from Campania, known for his way with sauces and spices, directed his assistants with quiet authority. Fresh oysters from Ostia had been delivered earlier, packed in seaweed to maintain their briny freshness. A haunch of wild boar, marinated in wine and herbs for 2 days, would be the centerpiece of the meal. The kitchen was a symphony of subtle sounds. The rhythmic chopping of vegetables, the gentle bubbling of sauces, the soft scrape of a knife against a whetstone as it was sharpened for carving the meat. The cook tasted a sauce, adding a drop of garum, the fermented fish sauce that was the foundation of Roman cuisine, then nodded in satisfaction. In the garden behind the kitchen, an elderly slave carefully harvested herbs for the meal: rosemary, thyme, and the mint that would be used in a refreshing drink to be served as the guests arrived. The garden was small but well tended, a quiet oasis in the urban landscape. A small fountain in the center provided a gentle background murmur of water, while climbing roses scented the air with their subtle perfume. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Romans turned their thoughts toward the evening ahead. For some, it would mean a simple family meal, followed by early retirement. For others, like Lucius Valerius and his family, it meant welcoming guests for a cena, a dinner party that combined sustenance with social connection. The triclinium, the dining room of the Valerius home, had been prepared with care. 3 couches were arranged in a U-shape around a central table, each couch accommodating 3 diners who would recline rather than sit during the meal. Fresh flowers from the garden had been arranged in bronze vessels, their colors and scents adding to the atmosphere of refined hospitality. Slaves had polished the silver drinking cups until they gleamed in the light of oil lamps, which would soon be lit as darkness fell. The mosaic floor, depicting marine life in vibrant colors, had been swept and sprinkled with fresh herbs that released their fragrance when stepped upon. The first guests began to arrive as the evening star appeared in the darkening sky. Lucius greeted each one personally at the door of his home, exchanging the formal kisses on each cheek that signified friendship and respect. Among the guests was a poet of some renown, a retired military officer who had served with distinction in Gaul, and a wealthy widow whose advice on financial matters was sought by many in their circle. As the guests reclined on the dining couches, slaves brought basins of scented water for them to wash their hands. The conversation began to flow as easily as the wine, which had been mixed with water in the traditional manner. Pure wine was considered barbaric by cultured Romans, who appreciated the subtle flavors that emerged when the strength was tempered. "Have you visited the new temple to Apollo?" the widow asked Lucius. "They say the marble was brought all the way from Carrara, and the columns are aligned in such a way that on the god's feast day, the setting sun illuminates the statue's face." Lucius nodded. "I was there for the dedication ceremony. The architect has created something truly worthy of the god of light and music. It is a space that seems to capture sound in a most remarkable way. When the choir sang, it felt as though their voices were coming from the heavens themselves." The conversation meandered from topic to topic, a new philosophical treatise that had caused a stir among the educated classes, the quality of this year's olive oil harvest, gentle gossip about mutual acquaintances. Politics were discussed, in measured tones, with careful avoidance of anything too controversial. This was a time for harmony and connection, not debate. The food arrived in a carefully choreographed procession. First came the gustatio, the appetizers: eggs dressed with pine nuts and honey, olives marinated in herbs, small pastries filled with seasoned cheese, the oysters nestled on beds of crushed ice. Then the prima mensa, the main course, centered around the wild boar, which had been roasted to perfection and was carved at the table with theatrical flourish. Throughout the meal, a young flute player provided gentle background music, occasionally accompanied by the singer who performed old Roman songs that spoke of love and nature, of changing seasons and enduring values. During one particularly moving piece about the returning of spring after a long winter, the retired officer was seen to brush away a tear, reminded perhaps of his own youth in the countryside before his military career. As the secunda mensa, the dessert course, was served, fresh fruits, nuts drizzled with honey, and sweet wine cakes, Lucius invited the poet to recite some of his work. The guests settled into a comfortable silence as the poet's measured voice filled the room, his words painting images of pastoral landscapes and ancient myths in the minds of his listeners. In fields where once the legions marched in glory, now gentle wheat sways gold beneath the sun. Time's passage turns all triumphs into story, and peace blooms sweet where battles once were won. As the evening progressed, some guests departed with warm farewells, while others lingered, the conversation growing more philosophical as the night deepened. Julia and Marcus had been permitted to attend the early part of the dinner, but were now asleep in their rooms, dreams perhaps coloured by the fragments of adult conversation they had absorbed during the evening. Across the city, as most Romans, prepared for sleep, the Vestal virgins performed their nightly rituals in the temple of Vesta. These women, chosen as girls from noble families, dedicated 30 years of their lives to tending the sacred flame that symbolized the hearth of Rome itself. The flame was never allowed to go out, its perpetual light representing the enduring spirit of the Roman people. The chief Vestal, a woman of dignified bearing who had served for more than 20 years, moved through the circular temple with measured steps. The simple white garments she wore, the traditional hairstyle with its 7 braids, and the white veil that covered her head had changed little in the centuries since the first Vestals had been appointed by Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome. The temple was quiet at this hour, the marble floor reflecting the sacred flame that danced at the center. The Vestals took turns through the night watching over the fire, ensuring that it neither died nor burned too fiercely. It was a task that required constant vigilance, a living meditation on balance and continuity. Outside the temple, the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. The streets, which had bustled with activity during the day, were now mostly empty, though occasional figures could be seen making their way home by the light of torches or small oil lamps. The night watchmen patrolled in pairs, their footsteps echoing on the stone pavement as they ensured the safety of the sleeping city. From the height of the Palatine Hill, where the grand houses of the wealthy overlooked the city, the view of Rome at night was one of gentle beauty. The occasional flicker of lamps from windows, the silver path of the Tiber reflecting the moon's light, the dark masses of the great public buildings standing in silhouette against the star-filled sky, all combined to create a scene of timeless tranquility. In a modest insula, an apartment building near the Subura district, a young scribe named Publius lay awake, thinking of the manuscript he had been copying for a wealthy patron. It was a history of Rome, written in the elegant prose of Livy, and as Publius had transcribed the ancient words, he had felt a connection to the generations that had come before him in this eternal city. His small room was simple, a narrow bed, a table where he worked by daylight, a chest containing his few possessions. The walls were adorned with only a small painting of the countryside where he had grown up before coming to Rome to seek his fortune. Yet in this modest space, he felt part of something greater than himself, a link in the long chain of Roman civilization. As sleep finally began to claim him, Publius thought of the words he had copied that day. The study of history is the best medicine for a sick mind, for in history, you have a record of the infinite variety of human experience plainly set out for all to see, and in that record you can find yourself and your country. He drifted into dreams, filled with the Rome of centuries past, walking alongside the figures whose lives he had been transcribing. The night deepened, and the stars wheeled slowly overhead, following the same paths they had traced since Rome was nothing more than a cluster of wooden huts on a hill beside the Tiber. The city breathed with the slow rhythm of sleep, each exhalation carrying whispers of its long history, each inhalation drawing in the promise of days to come. In the gardens of a senatorial villa on the Pincian Hill, a nightingale began to sing, its clear notes rising through the darkness. Perhaps it sang for Rome alone, or perhaps for all places where human hands had shaped the world and human hearts had dreamed of leaving something that would outlast them. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the eternal city stood as it had for centuries, a testament to human endeavor, a repository of memories, a living entity that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless individuals while maintaining its own enduring identity. The morning light would soon touch the seven hills once more, gilding the temples and monuments, bringing warmth to the ancient stones. And as it did, Rome would awaken to another day in its long existence, another chapter in a story that stretched back to mythic times and forward into an unwritten future. In the quiet streets of the Aventine, a baker was already at work, his hands shaping dough as his father had taught him, and his father before him. The scent of fresh bread would soon fill the air, a simple pleasure that had remained unchanged through wars and peace, through the reigns of good emperors and bad, through all the triumphs and tragedies that had befallen the city over the centuries. Near the theatre of Pompey, a teacher of rhetoric was preparing for the day's lessons, reviewing the principles of persuasive speech that were the foundation of Roman public life. His students would soon arrive, young men eager to master the art of oratory that might one day allow them to sway the Senate or move a crowd in the Forum. Along the Appian Way, that ancient road that connected Rome to the southern reaches of Italy, early travelers were already in motion. Merchants with goods to sell, messengers carrying official communications, pilgrims coming to visit the temples, all made their way along the stone-paved route that had felt the tread of countless feet over the generations. In a workshop near the Circus Maximus, a sculptor was contemplating a block of marble recently arrived from the quarries. Within the white stone, he could already see the form waiting to be released. Perhaps a dignified portrait bust of a patrician, or a graceful rendition of Venus emerging from the sea. His chisels were laid out in neat rows, tools that connected him to a tradition of craftsmanship as old as Rome itself. The day was beginning anew, as it had for centuries, and would for centuries more. The rhythm of Roman life continued its measured pace, a dance of tradition and innovation, of respect for the past and adaptation to the present. In this eternal cycle, there was a profound comfort, a sense of being part of something greater than any individual lifespan. As the sun climbed higher, its light caught the gilded roof of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, creating a beacon that could be seen from across the city. The great father of the Roman gods watched over his people, as he had since the earliest days of the Republic, a constant presence in a world of change. In the Forum, the daily business of Rome was once again underway. Lawyers and their clients gathered near the basilicas where cases would be heard. Merchants counted their coins and arranged their wares. Friends greeted each other with the traditional embrace, exchanging news and arranging to meet later at the baths, or perhaps for a game of dice. The rhythm of the city continued, a gentle heartbeat that had sustained Roman civilization through triumph and disaster, through plague and prosperity, through times of greatness and times of decline. In this continuity, there was a kind of immortality, not of individuals, but of the collective creation that was Rome itself. And so, the eternal city breathed and moved and lived as it had done for centuries and would do for centuries to come. The stones that lined its streets had felt the footsteps of countless Romans, from the legendary founder Romulus to the humblest slave. The air that filled its spaces had carried the words of poets and philosophers, emperors and commoners, all adding their voices to the great conversation that was Roman civilization. In this moment, as in all moments since its founding, Rome stood as a testament to human endeavor and aspiration. Its monuments reached toward the heavens. Its laws sought to bring order from chaos. Its art strived to capture beauty in permanent form. And through it all, the daily life of its citizens continued in cycles as predictable and necessary as the turning of the seasons. The sun completed its arc across the sky, bathing the city in the golden light of late afternoon. Shadows lengthened once more, stretching across forums and temples, markets and homes. Another day in the life of eternal Rome was drawing to a close, one more infinitesimal increment in the vast span of its existence. As evening approached, lamps were lit once again in homes throughout the city. Families gathered for the evening meal. Prayers were offered to household gods. Stories were told to wide-eyed children. The circle of Roman life continued, unbroken through the centuries. And as night fell once more over the 7 hills, the stars appeared above. The same stars that had witnessed the founding of the city and would witness whatever fate awaited it in the distant future. In their eternal light, the moments of human history, both glorious and tragic, were rendered small, yet somehow more precious for their brevity. Rome slept, and in its sleep, it dreamed the dream of civilization, of order and beauty, of wisdom and strength, of continuity amid change, and perhaps, in some mysterious way, that dream reached across the centuries to touch those who would come long after, connecting all who have ever stood in wonder before the eternal city and felt the weight of its history and the whisper of its timeless voice. A soft thank you to you, the listener, for journeying through the quiet streets of ancient Rome with us tonight. If you found peace in these historical whispers, please subscribe so you'll never miss another gentle escape into the past. May your dreams be as tranquil as the still waters of the Tiber at dawn,